Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth budget work session for the Asheville City Council. My name is Esther Manheimer. I'm the mayor of the city of Asheville. And we're going to, we've got all of council here on this call and several staff. And we're going to begin by kicking it off to the city manager, who's going to introduce our presenter this afternoon. Deborah Campbell, please take it away.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, everyone. As the mayor said, this is our fifth work session and possibly our last one before the public hearing and before the vote for the manager's recommended budget. I'd like to just first take a minute to pause and thank, obviously, the staff for all the work that they've been done, but I also have to thank council. You all have given this kind of some extra effort. We don't normally have these many work sessions around the budget, so I really appreciate it. I think it's an indication of kind of the times that we're living in. I also want to thank the community. We've had a number of community engagement opportunities and have had relatively good turnout and our participation. It didn't turned out virtually, and I appreciate that. Last certainly but not least, we also added an employee engagement session and had good participation and input, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. As usual, staff from finance and budget will handle the yeoman's work and do the heavy lifting in terms of the presentations, and we have, as we've done in the past, places where we will stop to allow you all to have dialogue and discussion. Next slide. So in terms of the information that we want to cover, we want to just remind you all as well as the public what this process has been about. All the steps, all the information we've covered in the work session. We'll then provide you with an overview of our draft recommendations, outlining proposed investments in terms of council priorities in other areas, talk about the property tax rate, and then what our next steps should be in terms of the budget process. As I said, the public hearing and the actual action on the recommended budget. We'll also be talking about rescue plan funding. Luckily, I think yesterday, the guidelines about that funding, was published, and staff is taking a very, very deep dive to look over the information. It's about a 150-page document, so we are combing through it as quickly as possible, and we will continue to have those discussions. Next slide. As usual, we always begin with the end in mind. So we want to leave you with these messages. Again, this is a long presentation. It's going to cover a lot of information. But if you don't remember anything, we hope that you will take away these things. That these draft recommendations, they're based on all of the work that I just talked about, our internal work with our departments, community engagement, council priorities, and reflecting a continuation of the Reimagining public safety process that we began last summer. A property tax rate above revenue neutral is tentatively recommended to fund investments in the council priorities. Just couldn't make the numbers work without it. Some initiatives included in the manager's recommended budget that we will be presenting on May 25th will need to be finalized during the year, and you'll hear some more details about that, specifically a discussion around a potential consolidation of our 911 services. So with that, you can go to the next slide. I believe that I'm going to turn it over to Taylor Floyd, and thank you again. Taylor.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Taylor Floyd, Budget Manager. So I'm going to briefly review in this section what we've covered with you all during our previous work sessions, talk about next steps in the process to get the budget adoption, and review what's driven our budget process this year. Next slide. So just a quick review of the work sessions we've already had. We started out with a budget introduction. We talked about how the current fiscal year was going and what we learned from the compensation study. We followed up in the next two sessions with information on enterprise funds, fees, capital funding, our base or ongoing budget, and the American Rescue Plan. And then our most recent session provided some details on potential investments in your priorities, how we calculated the revenue neutral tax rate, and some more discussion on the American Rescue Plan. So that's kind of where we've been. And next slide. So if you look at those dark blue, that's the light blue is where we've been, the dark blue is where we're going. The last work session today will cover the topics the city manager outlined, and then we sort of start into the formal budget process that's driven by state statute. That starts with the manager's proposed budget at your regular meeting on May 25th, followed by the budget public hearing June 8th, and then in a work session if needed, and finally council adoption of the budget on June 22nd. So, and again, I know we've showed you these slides before, but we think they're important, so wanted to go through them quickly. Just starting from the internal work, we started the budget process for this year with these two crises that presented a lot of uncertainty, but we used that to look at our existing services and their impact on the most vulnerable in our community. And through that work, staff identified some challenges, one being that the organizations just spread really thin. Another, that our community has different access to information about our services and even to those services themselves. And that while we put a lot of effort into community input, we have trouble reaching everybody in the city. In response to those challenges, we're focusing our work on neighborhood level engagement and developing clear data-informed decision-making. And much of that work is work that you won't see necessarily reflected in some of the new investments. But it will still consume a lot of staff time. And as the manager said, we still have a lot of work to do next year to get through all of this. But we think that this will help provide the clarity, transparency, and accountability that we need to be successful. Next slide. So looking at the community work and the engagement that we've done, we started trying to build on that reimagining public safety work through an online survey and virtual sessions that we held over the last couple months. And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about what we heard in a few slides, but it's centered around better linking the work that the city does to people's lives, better access to staff and services, and more support for neighborhoods. And when we're thinking about responding to those interests, those challenges, we're going to use those internal strategies we identified, and we're specifically going to provide some funding for neighborhood grants, and we'll be working to better communicate how our existing work impacts neighborhoods. Next slide. So finally, in this little section, council has continually refined priorities starting from that Vision 2036 through the April City Council retreat, where you all identified the 4 priorities listed here. And again, we'll continue our work to address those priorities by layering in the strategies that I mentioned, the data-informed decision-making, and neighborhood-level engagement, and neighborhood-focused investment. So that's kind of, again, what's led us to where we are today. Next slide. So a little more detail on the community engagement feedback. We heard essentially that people want to better understand how the city's budget impacts their life and how they can inform decisions around the budget. We also heard that people want more and better information about the budget and the services that we provide. And that includes transparency, that includes easier access, more access, increased access. And finally, people really want input on the process and want to be able to see the results of that process in their neighborhoods. They want to see those neighborhood level investments where they live. So moving to the employee engagement, I just wanted to touch on that briefly as well. As we perhaps would have expected, we heard a lot of interest in what was going to be done to implement the compensation plan. And ultimately what that plan gave us is information about the market rate for each individual position that we have. And I think when employees say they want to feel valued as it relates to compensation, it's really about feeling that they're paid what their skills and experience are worth in the marketplace. So hopefully we'll be able to act upon that information. Staff also feel that they don't currently have resources, if that's other staff, operational needs or capital needs, to meet the expectations around council priorities and for core service delivery. And those last two bullets are really kind of around the same theme, that we are going to continue to look at what resources we do have available to us to make sure that we're maximizing those resources in the community. Any questions? All right, well, we'll move on to the next. Oh,
Taylor, this is
sure.
Kim. So can we go back to slide 7 for a second? Because I'm a little concerned about, like, when we name 2 crises, there are overlapping issues and concerns with multiple crises happening at the same time. Overlapping issues, overlapping concerns. I'm concerned that the climate emergency is not yet acknowledged as a crisis here. Additionally, with our Buncombe Health Board last summer naming racism as a public health crisis, I hope we can just state that explicitly, that the impact of racism in our entire community, it impacts our health and our well-being for everybody.
Absolutely, and I don't mean to say that these are the only 2 things, negative things perhaps we'll say going on in our community, but those 2 specifically are really what pushed us from a process standpoint internally to do something a little bit different from what we've done in the past. And I do think that we'll continue to try to build in both the climate emergency and the other things that you mentioned as well, as we move forward. And as we get farther in the process, I hope you'll see that we've tried to make some investments, new and ongoing, to help address some of those concerns.
Thank you for that. I just think when we say social unrest might be an outcome, or like conflict is a normal part of relationships. But the social unrest that we saw might have been differently if we had been addressing the overlapping crises in a different way. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Thanks. Any other questions? All right. So next, I'm going to dive into some of the specific recommendations that I was talking about. And I'll say, to start this, this is a long section. I can't even make it all the way through. Tony McDowell is going to pick it up partway through there, but feel free to ask questions when you have them, because it is a long stretch of information. So even though I just covered it, again, we want to remind you that we're trying to address the challenges we've identified through our internal and external work, as well as achieve your goals by utilizing those 2 strategies I talked about, that neighborhood level engagement and that clear data informed decision making. Next slide. So we do think that these recommendations represent a balanced and fiscally responsible budget. And that balance is really about trying to balance the impact on tax and ratepayers with the investments that we think we need to make to successfully achieve our goals. And we try to do that. We try to find that balance by minimizing the impact of rising costs of service delivery. We've tried to keep our budget flat where we could do that. We also try to do that by using one-time funding strategically where it's appropriate to do so, to advance some key initiatives like reparations and investments in neighborhoods. We do that by fully funding the most significant operational reduction that we had to make in last year's budget, and that's holding those positions vacant for half of the year. And then finally, we try to do that by continuing to fund our multi-year capital program. Next slide. So we've organized this part into these kind of categories that you see here. Some of them are, some of our investments are new investments. Like I said, some are ongoing investments. We think these 8 categories reflect both your priorities as well as some other key areas that we want to invest in. Next slide. The first of those is reparations. The recommendation would provide $200,000 for planning and community engagement process to start next fiscal year, as well as an additional initial allocation of $1 million for reparations. And again, since these are one time, we're going to offset those costs with a fund balance allocation. Also want to make note that we do anticipate there's likely to be some other resources available, but that will really depend on the number and scale of hotel rezonings and how they utilize the community benefits table. Next slide. Oh, wait, sorry, you're already there. So neighborhoods and housing, we're appropriating $150,000 in fund balance to add to an existing 50 that was already set aside for neighborhood investments. We're going to use that to start a small scale neighborhood grant program that I referenced earlier. We also, again, want to call out some existing budget that's dedicated to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That's the $500,000 annual allocation, as well as land use incentive grants and fee rebates for affordable housing developments. That's that $225,000. And finally, in this area, I just want to make a note. We're working to program some additional capacity that we think we have in our CIP. That's really a result of stretching our existing funding a little farther because we're seeing lower interest rates on recent debt issuances and some changes to project spending timelines. So that's good news. Again, our money goes a little farther, but we hope that we'll be able to utilize that to fund additional sidewalks, road repairs, building maintenance, and other needed investments. But again, things that we want people to see in their neighborhoods.
Taylor, Councilmember Turner has raised her hand.
Thank you, Deborah. I forget they can't always see that. The 225 for Luigi, is this kind of the existing rebates we're giving annually, or is this new expected rebates?
So those are there's two separate pieces to that. We just put them together to save space. One is the fee rebates. Those are a little hard to judge because they kind of come in as projects are developed, right? And somebody comes down and is ready to go, thinks theirs matches. So it's a little bit of a challenge to kind of budget those on an annual basis. The land use incentive grants are also a little bit, and until they actually start, they're a little hard to guess. But that we think is appropriate for what we need for next year for both of those two programs together. I will say that the Luigi, as more of the projects that have already been approved are completed and come online, that number will go up because we'll just have more projects that we're providing that incentive to.
Thank you.
Sure. Great, next slide. So another area we're looking to make some investments in, excuse me, is in services for youth. We're looking to make those additional investments that directly benefit the younger folks in our community, especially in some traditionally underserved areas. And that includes expanding evening and weekend hours at recreation centers and adding some resources for enhanced maintenance at high-use parks. And that enhanced maintenance includes more cleaning, more trash collection, and more landscape maintenance, among some other things. And again, just to highlight some ongoing investments that we're making to support the youth in our community. We have the City of Asheville Youth Leadership Academy and the Strategic Partnership Fund, which supports nonprofits working in the community to close the opportunity gap. In response to the pandemic, we worked with the city schools to provide a safe space for students to learn and grow in a community-based small group setting through the pods at recreation centers. And then finally, we're continuing to work with community partners to identify what type of programming we should be offering at which location. So again, a lot of ongoing work there, some more work to be done, again, as the manager said in her introduction, as it relates to this. And I think this is my last slide. I'm going to hand it over to our finance director, Tony McDowell.
Thanks, Taylor, and good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, thanks, Taylor, for getting us this far. I know you're struggling with some allergies, and so I appreciate you working through it to this point so that everyone doesn't have to listen to me for 30 slides or so. But I'm going to pick up where Taylor left off. And once again, we're kind of in a long stretch of the presentation here. So if you all have questions, please feel free to interrupt me as I'm going through the slides. But I'm going to pick up with the next investment category that we want to talk about, and that's the reimagining public safety. And obviously, this is something that we've been working on since last fall, really since last spring. And so we want to talk a little bit about some of the investments that we made then and the work that we're continuing around those, as well as some additional investments and kind of reallocation of dollars that we're looking at for the upcoming budget. So where I want to start was to let you all, or to talk a little bit about the funds that we're looking to reallocate from the vacancies that we currently have in the police department. We currently have 67 sworn vacancies in that department. And based on the hiring plans and the turnover rate that we're seeing, we know that we can't fill all of those positions next year. So we want to utilize some of the savings from those vacant positions to do some other things within the police department budget and also within some of the other areas of reimagining public safety. So specifically on this slide, we're going to highlight one of the big uses of the savings from the vacancies next year is to implement the APD, or the Asheville Police Department portion of the compensation study. And I'll show you some more numbers on that as we go a little bit further on. But we'll be using some of the dollars to do that, and also to provide some additional overtime within the police department simply for the coverage issues that they're having because of those vacancies. We're also going to utilize some of the savings from the vacancies to provide some additional training for police, specifically around de-escalation, verbal judo, crisis intervention, and some fair and impartial police trainings that directly relate back to reimagining public safety. We're also using some of the savings to cover some increased costs within the police operating budget. We've talked to you all in the last couple of work sessions about the increase in the cost for the body-worn camera maintenance. So we'll be utilizing some of the savings to do that. We'll also be utilizing some of the savings to provide some additional funding for the Development Services Department. If you all remember back last fall, as a part of the initial phase of reimagining public safety, we moved some of the nuisance enforcement items out of police and over to Development Services, specifically noise ordinance and animal control services. And what we've discovered so far is that in order to provide those services in that department, we need some additional resources to do that. So we'll be reallocating some further dollars out of police into Development Service to cover those needs for some additional positions in Development Services. Next slide. We are also looking to position ourselves with this budget to be able to consolidate 911 services. The city manager mentioned that in her opening comments. The negotiations currently are continuing with Buncombe County around this, and we don't have a final number yet in terms of what the cost may be or what that may look like. But we feel like the budget that we're preparing to bring to you all in a couple of weeks will put us in a position to move forward with that consolidation, utilizing the existing APD telecommunications budget that we currently have in place. Similarly, we are also still working on budget proposals for a crisis response team for mental health and substance abuse, as well as homeless response team. Those budget proposals are still under development, and we don't have solid cost figures on those right now to include in the budget, but we do anticipate moving forward with those proposals in the upcoming fiscal year. And then another item to mention, and it's not specifically related fully to the police department, but we are adding some money to the budget next year. The Broadway Public Safety Station, which will include primarily fire, but also some police facilities, is anticipated to open in the fall of 2022. There's no additional police officer positions requested associated with that, but we are going to add 15 new firefighters. In order for those firefighters to be ready to go on shift in 2022, we're going to hire those firefighters during the upcoming fiscal year, and we anticipate the cost of that to be about $583,000. Next slide. Look, our final slide on reimagining public safety. Again, just wanted to kind of remind you all of some of the investments that we made and some of the changes we made last fall. If you remember, we reallocated $770,000 from the police department last fall. Some of that went into development services for the services I talked a little bit about a few slides ago. But some of the money also went into the IT department for enhancements to the data office, the Office of Data and Improvement and Accountability. And we've hired 2 positions already in that office utilizing the funding that came over. We've also hired an additional person in communications to serve as a neighborhood liaison, utilizing those funds. And we've also had some additional homeless outreach that was approved, as a part of the initial phase of reimagining public safety. And then just a couple other things to highlight. Within the police department budget itself, they've gone through a reorganization, and they've identified some resources that they are now focusing on community engagement. The staffing of that will continue in the upcoming year. And then there's also going to be continuing conversations with the Asheville Housing Authority and Asheville City Schools to assess APD's role in those operations. Next slide. Moving on to transportation, to highlight some new investments that we're going to be recommending in the budget related to transportation. The first of those is the next phase in the expansion of transit service. And these expansions would take place in October of this year. And they include extending the evening hours, which would complete year one of the transit master plan, and also would include increasing the frequency on the S3 and S6 routes from 90 minutes down to 45 minutes. And that comes at a cost of about $1.1 million next year, which would be borne by the general fund. And that's not a full year's cost, since we would only be starting service in October. So that represents 9 months of cost next year. The full cost of that in the following year would be slightly higher than that. Budget also includes $175,000, and we've mentioned this in a previous work session, to cover the cost of the existing transit service contract, and that's just to continue providing the current service level that we have. And then finally, and we've mentioned this before in some of the other work sessions as well, we have some money built into the budget to fully fund, or for a full year funding, the River Arts District Transportation RADTIP maintenance project. That project wrapped up recently, and we budgeted some money in this year for additional staff to begin maintenance of that, and the full year budget of that is included for next year. Next slide. In the area of environment, and Taylor mentioned this a little bit earlier on, and the first two things are new dollars to cover kind of the cost of continuing to do what we do now. But I think they are important, and they are significant additions to the budget. The first of those is $300,000 that we're adding to the base budget, and that's simply to maintain the current household recycling program. The costs are going up within that industry, and our provider is increasing the cost for our contract in the coming years, and so we have to put additional resources in that program just to continue the current level of service. The second item on this slide is $200,000, and we've also mentioned this before, some additional funding to provide storm response for significant weather events. And we're seeing more and more of those, and it most likely does relate to climate change. So we're seeing not only the typical weather events, the winter storms that we get, but we're also seeing events in the spring and the fall that lead to flooding and mudslides. And so we're adding some additional money to the Public Works Department to help them be prepared to deal with those events. Some ongoing investments in the environment that we want to highlight, and I see there's a hand raised, so I'll stop.
Go ahead, Tony. It's about one you're about to mention. Please go ahead and finish your slide.
And in our previous work session, we highlighted some of the things that are going on within our sustainability program, but I wanted to pull out here and highlight the Green Savings Program. And this is something that we've had in place for about 10 years now, where we take the savings that we achieved when we installed LED streetlights, and we utilize those savings to do other things and make other investments, green investments into our operations. And right now, there's some money in that program right now. We anticipate some additional dollars being added to it on July 1st. So we think that program is going to have about $425,000 available to start next fiscal year for additional green investments. We also wanted to highlight briefly the tree ordinance implementation and enforcement. We do believe that in next fiscal year, at least, we can handle implementation and enforcement of the tree ordinance utilizing existing staff, and then assess future needs as construction activity increases. And then finally, we're going to be talking to you all about fees tonight. But one thing we wanted to highlight is that we are likely be bringing to you all mid-year an assessment of the sanitation and stormwater services, looking at those services, looking at the needs in those areas, and potentially recommending fee increases related to those areas. So I'll stop there and see Councilmember Turner. Do you have a question?
I did. I guess I'm just looking at this as our opportunity to perhaps talk about an urban forester. So I'm seeing some things, but this language of existing staff, so not looking at an urban forester or an expansion at that time. Did you all look at that? And I mean, I guess I'm not aware of like additional funding for the storm response, if that's like something we ran into last year and this is an actual need, or if we're trying to plan, or if there's room to do some of that and some of a forester, or could anyone speak to that or where we got with that position? I realize it's an ongoing expense. So
Tony, you might mention, I assume that the storm response can come from the stormwater fund, whereas that can't be used for a urban forester. It's not interchangeable money. I thought, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, actually, the storm response is coming from the general fund. It's really for snow and ice removal. It's for mudslides. So it's the kind of things that aren't covered under the stormwater fund. So it would be all general fund money. But
I know we're in a special circumstance this year with a lot going on, and it may not, trying to get back to regular staffing may not be the best time to also add more staffing. But is there a nod? Are we looking to this in the future, this urban forester position? I know it's a big community desire.
Tony, if I could interject.
Sure.
Yes, it is. And it is one that we feel like that we can better assess what our needs will be after we understand how we currently are managing implementation of the ordinance. The ordinance was just passed last year, I believe. And so we haven't had the kind of development pressure that we've had in the past as well. So we're trying to get some sea legs to understand level of effort right now and order of magnitude in terms of the resources that will be needed. We had extensive conversations with development services staff, and they felt that for this year, they would like to understand, again, that level of effort that's needed. What we will say is that we will enforce the tree ordinance. And then I think understanding what additional needs are needed for someone if we added a new urban forester position.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I do think it's a goal that we need to be looking at. So I guess maybe process question and follow up. When that large project was approved out near Candler, there was a tree canopy ordinance. I think they paid in $500,000. So we have the infrastructure to roll out that. So we don't need this forestry position to kind of handle the tree canopy fund or anything.
Not to our knowledge. And I don't think that position would be managing that type of a financial transaction as well.
Okay, so because what the in lieu fund is money to replace canopy other places. So
that's correct.
Yes, yeah.
I think Ms. Roney has a question.
Yes, thank you for that additional information about the future, but that doesn't yet addressing the harm that's already been done. So what is our plan for tree canopy loss that already exists, especially the disproportionate impact on our historic neighborhoods and our housing authority neighborhoods?
So I think that with the new ordinance and building up the funding and also looking at some of the capital funding that we, through good management, we will have potentially some resources that we can reinvest back into those areas. But I guess that would be my response now. I don't know if we have anyone from development services on the call.
Maybe that's a question for later. This
Sure.
is kind of looking at like the tree ordinance we have now that's new, but we are going to have to acknowledge the not just what comes next, but what has already happened.
Yeah, I think that the payment in lieu, all of those things, those resources, those new resources actually will be used to first and foremost provide a stopgap for further damage, and then to assess if there needs to be replantings and working with our partners, Green Opportunities and other groups. Ms. Roney, did you have anything else to add?
Well, the last thing I would say is just from my experience with the sidewalk fee in lieu, which I know we can talk more about that separately. But the problem that was happening in the past is we weren't charging a fee in lieu that would even replace a sidewalk of the equal amount or size. So I hope we will learn from that and make sure that our tree fee in lieu is enough to even plant the repair.
Ms. Roney, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that we did learn. And I think if you'd ask the development community, we have a fairly healthy fee. Ms. Whistler, and then back to Ms. Turner.
Thanks, Deborah. Hey, just a question about the tree in lieu, fee in lieu for the tree. Tree in lieu, I like that. Can we use that fund for non-city owned property?
We'll get back with you. I'm not sure, Tony, if you have the response.
No,
Brad.
I don't know.
Brad may be trying to get in.
Yes, Councilwoman Whistler, I'm just trying to make sure I understand your question. The fee in lieu that we have, essentially, if a development is unable to meet the requisite tree protection, and this is relative to the kind of development and the location where it's at, they can pay the fee in lieu, which essentially, per the ordinance, is required then to be used to create new trees, either by purchasing real estate or planting trees within the same designated area. So that perhaps is, to say, downtown or some other portion of the city. So we can use those funds, I believe, for the acquisition of either real estate or for planting additional trees within the same district where the proposed development is. But we would not be purchasing outside of Asheville, because the goal is to try to mitigate the loss of trees within the same area where it's occurring.
But can we replant on private property?
So my question, Brad, is like, say you're gonna, plant it in the same area. I get that, but like, could we plant it on a privately owned land, or does it have to be only on city-owned land?
And
That's my question.
I noticed that our development service director has just joined the meeting, and I might be smart to pass it to him for an even more educated answer on this. So Ben Woody, please.
Thanks for joining us.
Save him, Ben. Save him, Ben.
Hey, thank you. I'm going to try. I'm actually leaving a site visit right now. So if I can hear the question again, I will try to save him.
Okay, so my question is when we ask developers to put money into the tree fund because they weren't able to comply with our tree ordinance, those funds and the new trees, can those be used on non-city owned land, or do the funds have to be used for trees or for on only city owned land?
So I know that the funds, they have to be used in the same resource district for which they were generated. So there's 3 resource districts. There's urban, suburban, and downtown. So we'd have to use them in the same resource district. They have to be related to urban forestry. But I'm not aware that they have to be used on public property. I don't, unless Brad tells me otherwise, I believe they could be used on private property.
So I think that is right. I don't believe the ordinance creates any specific prohibition against planting those on private property. Now, in such a case, what we would want to do is ensure that any trees planted, that the city would maintain the ability to require those trees to be kept up and stay in place, as opposed to simply planting them and walking away. I would defeat the purpose of the ordinance. Generally speaking, how this has functioned in other places is that municipalities will often essentially buy land that is utilized for trees, or buy additional trees for areas that is already city owned. But you could see a situation exist where perhaps someone creates land that they want to use for the tree save area that could essentially be privately owned. But that comes with a few more strings that would have to be in place in order to, I think, properly enforce that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Turner?
Thanks. I guess I wanted to almost clarify something I said for those who may be listening in, because we did approve a project with funds going into the tree canopy fund. However, those funds didn't become available right then, right? The understanding is that those funds are deposited when they get their CO, when they have completed the building, right? That's kind of the standard rule. Is that right, Brad? I just didn't want to imply that there's money sitting out there right now to be planting these trees. I realize that it may not be obvious that we haven't actually received money in that fund.
I'm not aware of the current status of the fund, and I believe I might defer to Ben yet again to tell us if any fee and lieu have been paid on this yet. I'm not sure that has been the case. I know that there were some developments that were looking into that.
Sage is asking for the trigger. Is it the application? Is it the CEO? I know that the project that we approved on Sardis has not, nothing's happened with that yet. So I'm sure the funds on that project haven't been paid in because I don't even think they've attempted to pull a permit yet.
I think the rule is at CO, because that's how we do the housing trust things. When you are committing funds to the housing trust, it's when your project is completed.
I know that that's how we did sidewalk fee and lieu. I'm not sure if it's application or.
And I don't mean to derail us. Just
Mayor, Mr. Woody can respond.
Yes, we would collect those fees prior to the certificate of occupancy. That is correct, Councilwoman Turner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
So council, we did, the city did, and maybe we need to do a little, because our favorite new thing is work sessions. Maybe we need to do a work session on this topic because we did commission a tree canopy study, as you know, and it was presented at AV Tech Auditorium, and maybe 300 people were there, and it was very thorough, and it documented very clearly where we have canopy loss and where we have canopy growth. And it also presented, and that was with Asheville Greenworks, did an excellent job of presenting models of how cities have regrown their tree canopy. And it's true, it's often done through partnerships. And some prime locations for tree planting are school grounds, places like that are kind of easy to access and easy to partner with. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's a lot of models to look at, but the good news is we've finally redone our tree ordinance, and it's a lot stronger than it ever used to be, and it should be bringing in some significant sums of money to work with. We have had a request for an urban forester. I think Gwen can remind me, and it's Shanika too, over the last several years, maybe 2 or 3 years, because the request for an urban forester, I think, was included in one of the plans that came out of the Tree Commission. And so this is probably the 3rd year I've heard a renewal of the request for this funding for this position. And staff has maintained that they feel that the duties of this position can be fulfilled by existing staff. So again, if we want to spend more time dedicated just to this topic, I think that's great, because there's been a lot of work done on this. And maybe when Ben's not trying to drive from a site to another site, we'll be able to get into it a little bit more.
Okay, any other questions on this slide? All right, we can move to the next one. Next area we wanted to talk briefly about was investments in economic development. And we've mentioned this in a previous work session, kind of like the Luigi program works, in which we enter into agreements that we pay out over a number of years. We also do that with some economic development incentive agreements. And based on the schedule that's already been approved, we're going to see a $380,000 increase in our commitments for that funding next year. That's primarily related to our agreement with Linamar. That commitment is ramping up next year. We also want to highlight the ongoing investments that we're making in community and economic development related to the Asheville Business Inclusion Office, And we're going to reallocate some funding that was in that budget for contracted services in order for us to be able to fund a new position in-house to work with that program. Next slide. So over the next few slides, I want to talk about the investments in our employees and workforce that are part of the draft recommended budget that we're sharing with you all today. The first of those is the investment in implementing the Archer compensation study. At the March 9th work session, Peggy Rowe, our assistant to the city manager, went through the Archer compensation study recommendations and highlighted the costs of implementing that program. And so what we're recommending in the budget is the full implementation. I think the number we shared with you all back in March was about 7.8 million. After we refined our estimates a little bit, it was pretty close. It was actually just a little bit higher at 7.9 million. But what that investment next year will allow us to do is to fully fund the employees that are on the public safety pay plan. It will fully fund the Archer recommendations. And it will also bring employees who are not on the public safety plan, all the other employees in the organization, either up to the new minimum of their pay grade or give them a 2.5% pay increase, whichever is greater. And I'll have some more information, some more detailed numbers on that in the next few slides. We also wanted to highlight again, because it is a large cost, that one of the things, and I think Taylor mentioned this, that we did to help balance this year's budget was to hold some positions vacant for half a year. We are recommending fully funding those positions next year, so that's a budget addition. And then finally, the increase to the local government retirement system. And we talked about that in prior work sessions as well. It's about a $700,000 overall increase. And I think this is the third year in a row that we've had to put more money into the local government retirement system. And we anticipate that increase, or that continuing over the next several years based on the projections that we've seen from the state.
Tony, yeah, okay. Yes. You saw Ms. Whistler, okay.
Yeah, I can see them.
Okay, great, okay.
Okay, Tony, two things. So the 1.1 is literally everybody gets hired July 1 and they work for a whole year? When we've got how many open positions? Non-police open positions?
I think we have somewhere around 100, I think, right now.
So you think you're going to be able to hire 100 people day one, July 1?
No, we don't. One, and I think one thing we wanted to point out is we do, as a part of the budget every year, assume a certain level of vacancy savings. So the budget that we bring to you all in 2 weeks will not be a budget that budgets 100% of every employee for the entire year.
Okay.
We've been over the last few years assuming a 1.5% vacancy rate, and that has worked well for us. We do fully budget fire department positions because we found that even when they have turnover there with their out-of-class pay and their overtime, that we need to fully fund those that department. But no, we won't be fully funding, in any of the general fund departments except for fire and I think a couple of the smaller departments. Okay. That would be the gross cost of doing that if we did.
Okay, and then the 1.2%, I assume, is based on salaries. So is that based on is that 700 assuming that the raises are going to be in effect or not? And what's the difference?
It is, and it would be, if the raises did not go into effect, you're right, it would be slightly less. It wouldn't be a huge change. But we would be able to lower that number slightly. And I can't remember
no, that's okay. I was just more asking for.
Okay.
So you can see, yeah.
So that is in line with some of my other questions. Thank you, Gwen. One of the questions I have is about this 2.5% pay increase. It reads to me in this report that it's across the board. Would this also include market rate positions? Or positions that are already at the market?
Yes, it would include all positions that were either not as part of the public safety pay plan or were not brought up to the minimum based on Archer's recommendations.
Okay, because I still continue to have the concern that if we keep doing an across the board pay increase, we'll end up in the very near future back at continuing the wealth gap in our own City Hall, and then we'll still have people that aren't able to afford to live and work here. So I'm curious if we could have some information before our next meeting about the positions that are already at market rate and what the difference is in the 7.9 million.
Yeah, we can certainly provide that. And we don't have that exact information, but I do have some more detail on a couple of slides I think that might help answer that question. So I'll make sure that we stop there and go through those numbers. But we can definitely provide that. Councilmember Turner?
Yeah, just real quick to say, when we started this, we heard about the employee engagement process and their desire for more tools and stuff. And just from my experience of working closely with the city for so many years, I know we probably need more staff in general. And I just kind of want to take a minute to say I've been really floored and impressed by the nonstop response at the city level from COVID on. I mean, no one stopped. Everyone's been frontline workers. It's been an incredible thing. And I feel like there's a lot going on. And if anything, I'm hoping we at some point start to talk about needing some additional positions to help support. I know there's probably been requests, and I'm sure you're handling that, Deborah, but just to kind of acknowledge that, we have a hard working staff. I know many that take calls at night and weekends. I see them at events, and it's just like endless work. And I really think we need to support them, and that they're feeling valued is crucial. So I'm glad that we're taking these steps. I also hope at some point we're looking at, departments that might need more positions as we grow as well.
Ms. Turner, absolutely. I appreciate you all acknowledging the hard work of our city staff, because they work awfully hard. And this has been a tough year. 2020 was a tough year. But what would help us most is filling the positions that we already have. And if we can make progress on filling those positions, I think that will help. But I will totally admit, we are understaffed. But certainly, if we could unfreeze, so to speak, the positions that we held vacant for the majority of last year, that would be a tremendous help. And I can assure you that the majority of our department heads, I know Ms. Whistler, you talked about, will we be able to hire all of those staff people? But I tell you, I think they got their job descriptions and they're ready to post as soon as we give them the okay. I think they're ready to roll. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we can go to the next slide then. So some other new investments we wanted to highlight, and we don't have dollar figures associated with these because these are really minimal cost to the budget, but they are important key investments that we wanted to highlight for our employees and our workforce. One is that we're going to be adding 2 new city paid holidays in the upcoming year. One is for Juneteenth and the other is for Veterans Day. We're also going to be adding 8 weeks of paid parental leave and 6 weeks of paid leave to care for a qualified family member with a serious health condition. And again, those will have some minor dollar impacts, but not significant dollar impacts, hard dollar impacts to the budget. And then finally, one ongoing investment that we wanted to highlight, and I think it's something we're proud of, is the fact that we'll be going into the 4th consecutive year where we've been able to hold not only employee contributions, but also employer contributions to the healthcare fund at the same level. And I've been doing budgets for a long time, and I don't remember ever there being a stretch of this many years in a row where we were able to keep those contributions flat. And a lot of that relates to our claims trend data, but also some of the things that we're doing internally with our wellness program to maintain the health of our employees. So we're really proud of that and wanted to highlight that. Next slide. So as I mentioned, I wanted to go through some of the numbers associated with this because it is a large cost to implement the compensation study. And as we mentioned, the total cost of it is about $7.9 million. We've got it broken down into the kind of the 3 categories that I mentioned on the previous slide. The first of which is bringing folks up to the minimum or a 2.5% increase. That's about a $3.5 million cost. The cost to make the adjustment on the police pay plan is about 1.6, and for fire it's about 2.7. So in the general fund, the total cost is about 6.7. So the general fund does bear the bulk of the cost for this compensation implementation. But the water fund does also have a significant portion at just under $1 million. But again, most of it is in, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that 2.28 million is everybody who's not police and fire, either to adjust their salary to make them competitive, or if they're not getting that salary adjustment, to do the 2.5% across the board raise.
That's
is
correct.
That what that is?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no other questions. I'll go on to the next slide. And again,
Tony, I just had a comment about the 2.5%. I think we just need to remind the public that people didn't get any raises last year. So, what you're trying to do with the 2.5% is to basically cover 2 years of COLA. Just a reminder that this isn't just a reminder that that's how staff has dealt.
Thank you, Gwen. I did not know that. Thank you.
Okay.
Tony, you were explaining earlier, just to connect the dots here, that 1.66 million for police is actually going to be absorbed by all of the vacancies that exist already in the police department. So their overall budget won't go up. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
As well as the other items you itemized on that slide previously, training and so on and so forth.
That's correct. Okay. Any other questions on this slide? Okay, we can go to the next one then. And Councilmember Roney, I don't think this probably exactly answers your question, but I think it kind of gets at where are those dollars being spent from the 7.9 million. So what we tried to show on this slide is, again, that middle column there breaks out the 7.9 million into the salary categories on the left. And so, for example, of the employees who currently make somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000, $2.7 million of the 7.9 will go to employees in that category, and that's 388 employees in that category. So if you do some math and you add up the categories all below $60,000, approximately 6.9 of the 7.9, or 87% of the investment is going to employees who make currently make below $60,000 in the organization. So I'll take a moment and pause there and see if there's any questions about this data. Okay, we can go to the next slide then. Okay, so we've shared a lot of information with you all. I talked a lot about the new investments. We've talked about some of the continuing investments that we're making within the existing base budget. But to kind of bring it all together on this slide, and we showed you all, I think, a similar slide at the last work session. So if you add up the numbers on the left, the new investments that are not currently part of the base budget, those total out to about 9.9 million. On the right is available resources to cover some of those costs. There is some capacity within the existing base budget. That's about 1.3 million. We're going to utilize, as we said, about 1.3 million from fund balance for the reparations and neighborhood grant programs. And then, as the mayor just alluded to, we're going to use some savings from APD to cover some of the needs as well. So when you add all it up, we end up with a difference between revenues and expenses of about $5.7 million in order to be able to do all the investments that we've highlighted on the past few slides. So we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to transition here from, and this is kind of the final piece before we turn it over to you all for some discussion, transition from the talking about expenses to talking about revenues. And as we go through the next few slides, we want to emphasize that the plan that we're tentatively recommending, we believe funds the new investments in a fiscally responsible way and continues the organization's tradition of strong financial management. So we can go to the next slide, please. So what we're recommending are draft recommendations on the revenue side of the budget in the general fund. In order to be able to fund the items that we've outlined, it would require a tax rate that's 3 cents above revenue neutral. And I'll walk you all through that in a moment and show you all the numbers. We went through the revenue neutral calculation at the last work session, and I think you all saw that the revenue neutral rate was going to be about 38.3 cents, down from our current tax rate of 42.89 cents. And so I'll show you all on a few slides what 3 cents above revenue neutral would look like. We are, however, cognizant of the fact that there is folks continue to struggle with economically because of the pandemic. So we are looking to minimize fee increases next year while maintaining our services. You all will be considering tonight the water rate increase, which would raise monthly rates slightly for the typical homeowner, but those rates would still be below what folks were paying back in FY20. And as I mentioned earlier, we're not recommending at this point any increases in solid waste or stormwater fees. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are looking at strategic uses of our available fund balance for one-time investments. Luckily, this fiscal year, our budget has performed better than we expected, so we do think there's going to be some dollars available in fund balance that we can utilize without bringing us below our target policy of 15%. And then continued planning for the investment of the ARPR funding, the American Rescue Plan funding. As our city manager mentioned when we started the presentation, we got the guidelines around how we could use those dollars yesterday, and staff is culling through that 150-page document as we speak to get a better understanding of what we can use those dollars on, and that process will continue well after the adoption of the manager's recommended budget here in June. Next slide, please. So on the tax rate, and I won't go through this, but this is the calculation that we showed you all at the last work session, where we statutorily required by the state to do this calculation to show folks what the revenue neutral tax rate would be. And for us, like I mentioned, it would be 38.3 cents next year. So we can go to the next slide. So to generate the additional revenue that we need of $5.7 million to cover the investments that we've gone through in the presentation, that would require a tax rate 3 cents above revenue neutral. Every penny on the tax rate generates about 1.9 million. So if you do the math and multiply 1.9 million by 3 pennies, that gets you the 5.7 million that we would need to fund those investments. And again, that results in a tax rate draft tax rate recommendation of 41.3 cents. So we can go to the next slide. So how does that impact folks in the community? So we reached out to the county tax office after our last work session to see what the changes were in the median assessed value for single family homes in Asheville. So prior to the revaluation, the median assessed value in Asheville was $232,100. After revaluation, it's $294,500. So that was an increase of 27% for the median homeowner. Under our current assessed value and tax rate, that homeowner pays $995 annually in city taxes. Under the proposal of 3 cent a tax rate 3 cents above revenue neutral, that same homeowner would see their tax bill next year be $1,215. And we've broken down there in the far right column what that looks like, not only on an annual basis, but also a monthly basis, because as you all probably know, a lot of homeowners pay their property taxes through their escrow statement as a part of their mortgage payment each month. And so they're really going to see the impact be on a monthly basis and how much their payment goes up versus it being on an annual basis. Next slide.
Tony,
yes.
Can you go back to that slide? Ms. Kilgore has a question. You're muted, Ms. Kilgore.
Yes. What I was looking at, Tony, on these assessed values on these properties and what the actual property taxes that we receive, it's sort of a big difference in this assessed value and the amount of the tax bill. So I'm trying to figure out what is causing that difference in what we're actually receiving and what I see here.
So you're asking how what the $220 increase?
I think that, Sandra, I think what you're not seeing here is the county tax and the school tax.
Well, see, that's what I was trying to, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, that's what you're at, yeah.
Yeah, because I think if people looking at this, if they're looking at the same slides, of course, they're going to be concerned too, because we all receive these tax bills. So that's the reason I was So basically, if he could just sort of elaborate on that to let people know that this bill is not what they're getting it because of the additional cost, that would be helpful.
Or that this is this just the city's portion of the county tax rate, which, as the mayor said, includes something related to schools as well as the county rate as well.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I'm saying, but for people that's looking at it, that's actually going through this, and I'm quite sure that they would like that, if we could sort of get that information out to them so they could understand it and not be,
Yeah, absolutely. And city manager's right. The numbers on this page represent just the city-only portion of the bill that homeowners would get from the county. As you all know, the county's going through its budget process right now as well, and looking at what their tax rate's going to be for the upcoming year. They put out some information, I think, a few weeks ago about potential tax rate above revenue neutral for them as well. We can certainly look and see what that information is and what the cumulative impact would be for both city and county. As for the school rate, I think it's about 65% of city residents live within the Asheville City Schools District and also pay that rate as well. And I don't know, I haven't heard anything from them yet about their intentions as far as setting a revenue neutral tax rate.
I think Ms. Turner did.
I was just going to echo, I think what Sandra is getting at is having a slide for the public that shows the county, the school, and the city's portion. I did see a report the county was looking at raising $10 million and adding some pennies. But, to her point, the collective impact when the county makes their changes and we make ours.
And we can do like a sample, but again, only less than half of the city gets the school tax, but then there are other parts of the city that might get a fire district tax or something like that. I think that might. No one.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And maybe we can put a note on this slide basically saying, please note it does not include county and fire districts and everything. But I'm a little hesitant to start publishing other, the counties and the schools' taxes, since we don't control it. And frankly, it hasn't been voted on yet, as far as I know. So maybe just like a cautionary, be aware that.
Yes, I think that would be
bill includes other things.
Yes, that's all I was asking for, is just to give people, so they wouldn't be confused. That's all.
We'd be more than happy to modify this slide, particularly as we go into the actual recommendations on the 25th.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I'd be interested in us re-looking, and I know our finance subcommittee did this once before, but programs that I know exist in Charlotte and in Durham that assist folks with their property taxes based on income qualification. So if you're below a certain income threshold, you might qualify for a reduced amount in your property tax rate. Right now, the state of North Carolina has a program for elderly who are income restricted, but there's not a program for folks of all ages who might qualify based on income. And it'd be nice if we could look at the programs they're using in Charlotte and Durham and see if we can model that. Always when we raise property taxes, it is a concern for folks that live here and own homes here, or trying to be able to stay. And we don't want property tax increases to result in folks having to move, sell their home. That would not be a good outcome. And, I think whenever we have this discussion, it's always good to remind folks that we're somewhat limited in terms of what revenues we have available to us as a city. Property taxes are the primary source of revenue for cities in North Carolina. We do get some sales tax, but we don't have control over how much sales tax we get. That is set by the state. And unless we had a referendum countywide, we can't change that. And we don't get the room tax, and we don't have a food and beverage tax, and so on and so forth. So we've got limited tools in the revenue toolbox that we're working with here.
Tony, I think, let's see, Ms. Roney and then Ms. Mosley.
Antoinette, you go ahead.
You know, it might be, what would be helpful for me is, in addition to these particular median assessed values, when we were discussing how there are additional taxes for those living within the city school system, I suspect that the value of those homes might actually be above what's listed here. So I'd be interested to know the impact on homes that are assessed higher. Maybe instead of 294, 354.5. Just curious to see what the difference would be.
We can get that. Thank you. Ms. Roney.
And following up on what Esther was saying, because I have been looking at that homesteader clause or act or however that works, and it being not just for folks over 65, but also differently abled, and underneath 31.5 is some of what the number I've been looking at. So if there is a way for us to get creative with not exasperating gentrification, because we have talked in this organization with the city of Asheville about reparations to address the harm of urban renewal and redlining. And if we just raise people's property taxes to do these things, I think it is potentially going to cause more harm. Even though we'd see a lot of what investment in long-term safety strategies looks like here: housing, youth support, neighborhood investments, evening transit hours, finally additional service to South Asheville to make it more accessible and reliable, and starting this reparations fund. But if we don't talk about the truth and reconciliation part, then we're leaving out the intergenerational leadership that reminded us last year that the divestment should go hand in hand with the investment. So one of the things I'm still waiting for is, what are the open positions that we did freeze? What are the open positions that we did not freeze last year? And will we really truly be able to fill all of those? And if not, then is that really the most fiscally responsible thing for us to be doing, to be budgeting these investment strategies on the most vulnerable in our community? So I still need information about all of the open positions, not just the ones that were frozen, but the ones that were not.
If there's no other questions, I think we're actually, the next slide is where we pause for discussion. So I'll open it up to you all, see if you had any other questions or comments, and then we can, we do have a few slides to wrap up after that.
Kim, this question's back. I want to make sure I understood your intent there. Are you saying that based on this idea that we may not be able to fill all those positions right away, that we may be able to strike a lower number and raise taxes a little less?
Indeed. So I know some cities are looking at whether it's permanently or temporarily freezing positions, so that we can have a closer estimate of what the budget really meaningfully is.
Ms. Whistler?
Thank you. You know, I know that briefly, I don't know, you know, there was some discussion about implementing the compensation adjustment incrementally. I am not supportive of that. You know, part of and one of my big reasons why I think we just need to bite the bullet is, if we don't bite the bullet this year, we're just going to bite the bullet next year. And everything I read says wages are going up. And so, and we're competing in the same environment as everyone else. So, you know, I think even though it's a big nut, and if anyone knows anything about me, they know that I'm fiscally responsible. But I just think we gotta swallow this one. You know, it's a way to thank our employees. I think it's going to make the city more efficient, and so at a minimum, I'm definitely supportive of the compensation piece of this budget, which is, you know, obviously the biggest chunk. I mean, you know, if you take everything else out, I think my calculation would say you might save a penny of the increase in And so I just don't want to step away from the compensation investment.
Thank you, Ms. Whistler. Ms. Turner.
Deborah, by chance, could you speak to a little, I know we lost some really great employees in last year and COVID had all of its reasons, but are we losing folks from burnout and extreme, do you think this will help with any of that?
I think that, well, let me just say a personal experience. When I was interviewing for this position, the greatest issue that I heard from every employee that I met with was around pay. And it was around the fact that a compensation study had been done several years ago, wasn't fully implemented. It was implemented for some, wasn't implemented for others, and it created such a huge morale issue. And so this has been on our agenda, the city manager's agenda, to city manager's office agenda, to number one, see if we could understand better what the difference in the market rate. And I think when Peggy presented the information about the study, we just have not kept pace. We just haven't. And we are losing really good, talented people. We're not losing them to, which Barbara left and many others have left. They're going out of town, but they're going to the county too.
Exactly. They're going to the county.
They're going
too.
Down the street.
That's why I wondered. And I'm glad you were able to speak to that because I sensed that. And I sensed that morale crushing moment of when we didn't implement. So to Gwen's point, I also appreciate that we are looking at just implementing this and just saying, it's time. It's time.
The county manager and I have a little debate a lot in terms of, just our ability to retain talent, and it's a friendly competition. I will assure you, and we always talk. There's nothing, vicious about, but I try to recruit our staff as well. That's just where we are, but we have a friendly conversation about it. We do it professionally, and we just need to make sure that we have, from a staff perspective, organizational perspective, the tools that will retain. Now, pay is not the only reason that people work for the city of Asheville. It isn't. But it sure helps. It helps to maintain them and retain them. And certainly the best and the brightest, because they can easily be wooed away from us.
And I think we saw,
now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think we saw on the front page of the paper yesterday, the day before, that Asheville was it Buncombe or Asheville had the highest cost of living in the state and the lowest wages. Yeah, it's timely. Thank you.
And that's across the board. Ms. Roney?
Can we go back to the slide that showed the tax example? Thank you. So I've been in this situation before, and I know that for a lot of people, $18.33 is just one example. It doesn't seem like a lot unless you've had trouble finding $18 in your pocket or the couch cushions. And we have a lot of people in our community struggling. So I think we need to be aware of the fact that so many of our people our neighbors and our elders and our students are not able to make ends meet. So this won't just impact homeowners. It's going to impact renters. It's going to impact business owners, commercial property owners, business renters. This will have a ripple effect on who is able to stay here. So I think we need more community partnerships. Transit is certainly one where we can look for more partnerships. And I'm looking forward to hearing where some of those partnerships might come before us in the next presentation of this budget.
And we totally agree with you, Ms. Roney, but and that's why I'm so glad that the mayor kind of reminded us that there are some examples of some other communities that are trying to mitigate the impact of these tax increases, especially after a reevaluation. So I think that it's timely. We also try to do our best to respond to the community needs and balance them with our sources of revenue. As the mayor said earlier, we are just so limited in terms of other sources of revenue, that the property tax is our major source. So I think what I'm hearing definitely is the need for additional information and also to do a little bit more research on the other communities that have programs that help either do abatement, tax deferments, link them to age, income, disabilities, whatever, or abilities, whatever ways that we can try to mitigate this impact, and to make sure that we present this as the city-owned portion. Ms. Whistler?
Hey, Deborah, I think I asked for this before, and I don't know that we did it or I missed it in my email, but the Finance Committee did last sometime, like within a year and a half.
It was February or January. Tony, what was it?
It was February of 2020.
Okay, if we could, because I'm not sure the whole city council saw that. If you wouldn't mind, Tony or somebody, sending that out to city council, so that you can see, because I don't, as far as I know, Brad, or Tony, there hasn't been any new programs that have been allowed under North Carolina law in the past year. So that information has been gathered. But if you wouldn't mind just sharing that out with council.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. It's on the Finance Committee website, and we can have Beth send that out.
It is, sorry about that.
We have done a little bit of follow-up research since the last work session, and the only other county that's attempted to do anything that we're aware of is Durham County, and they ended up recommending a tax deferral program, which was fairly complicated. Their county attorney's office did not think they could implement simply a tax rebate program. And so they went with a deferral option, which only, as the name implies, it only defers the taxes over a period of time. So if the home ever is sold or after a certain point, which I think of 10 years, that those taxes would be due. And it's my understanding from folks down in Durham that so far, at least, there haven't been a whole lot of people that have signed up for that program. But yeah, we can definitely provide you all with the presentation we did last year, and then also the information we learned from Durham County as well.
Councilwoman Mosley, I'm not sure, I thought I saw on your agenda, I haven't watched the recent AHAC meeting. Did y'all talk about a Luigi rebate on a personal level, a property tax rebate for an individual?
Not to any great extent.
Okay.
Okay, Tony, you want to go back to the next?
Sure. And we've only got, I think, maybe 2 slides left, and one is a reiteration of the key takeaways. But I wanted to stop on this one just quickly. So kind of a reminder of where we're at. So after the work session today, at your regular meeting tonight, Taylor and I will be back to talk about the fee changes. Those fee changes were presented to the Finance Committee last month, and they did approve forwarding those recommendations to you all tonight. So we'll review those here in a few hours. And then really between now and next Friday, it really is about a week and a half that budget staff has to finalize the manager's proposed budget. And so we're kind of down to our crunch period now, where we really have to take the numbers, put them into the document, put them into our financial system, complete the budget document, and get that out the door so that you all have that before you by the May 25th manager's presentation. But one thing I want to emphasize is, that's not the end of the conversation on the regular budget specifically, because even after we present the manager's budget on May 25th, you all will still have 4 weeks to deliberate on the information that we present, to hear the input that you get from the public hearing on June 8th, and then make changes, any changes that you might want before we adopt the final budget on June 22nd. So we don't have to make all the decisions here in the next few days or so. We have time to make additional changes after May 25th. So then next slide. So this is our last slide again, just to kind of remind you of the key takeaways that the recommendations that we've talked to you all about here today and throughout all the work sessions this spring have really been based on the internal work, the community input, and there's been a lot of work internally and gathering information from the community, hearing you all's priorities, and as we mentioned, continuing to take in information and continue the Reimagining public safety process as well. We talked a lot about the property tax rate and where we're tentatively at in terms of a recommendation. And then we want to emphasize again that some of the initiatives that we've been talking about with you all over the last few months we'll include in the manager's May 25th budget, but as many as we can, but likely some of them simply won't be finalized by then. The 911 consolidation, some of the community paramedic initiatives, as well as the funding and the plan around the American Rescue Act. Those conversations are going to continue well past May 25th and into next fiscal year, most likely. So I do believe that's the last slide that we have. Happy to answer any additional questions that you all might have.
Ms. Whistler?
The only thing I would ask is for the draft budget, don't print them. You usually print them and then I have a draft and a final. So if we could just electronically send those, because it's a very large document.
Yeah, we talked about that. We didn't print any last year because of the pandemic, and we're not planning on printing any this year. And some of it's simply the case that we try and keep as much flexibility in the process so that you all can make decisions, and the city manager can make decisions near the end. So we simply don't have time really to get documents printed and turned around.
That's okay. You don't need to print them at all.
Thank you.
Well, I never understood that. Like, was it required by some esoteric law I didn't know about that you had to make it a big bound printed thing? Is this like an accounting question?
The American League really wants one.
I think there's a requirement that it has to be available in the city clerk's office, but I think we found that last year that we could provide an electronic copy, and that was all that was needed. I don't know, Brad.
That makes sense.
Hit him cold with this. I don't know if he knows anything about that.
Yeah, Tony, I think that's correct. The law requires that it be quote unquote presented to council, but does not specify the form, and it has to be available in the clerk's office. But there again, it's not specified as to the format of that. So I believe we've gotten the okay to present it in a digital form.
Ms. Roney? You're on mute, Ms. Roney.
While we're talking about printing things, please print them on 100% post-consumer recycled paper. I order it. It's very easy to get. But on the same slide that we saw stormwater reaction fund, it's like in case something terrible happens, we also were talking about trees. So I just can't overstate that if we get in front of a situation that is a solution, we have a long-term investment. Hopefully we wouldn't have as many stormwater issues if we repaired our tree canopy.
Thank you. Okay, Mayor, I think that.
Okay, that's a wrap. Yeah. Okay, folks.
Are you sure? I think I want another budget work session.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, these have been so fun.
Yeah. Okay, well, we are going to be right back here at 5 o'clock for our council meeting in just an hour. So see everyone back here.
Hey, thanks everyone. From someone that's new, 5 sessions was really great for me. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you saying that. See you in an hour.